January 15, 2026. At exactly 2:17 a.m. local time, the freezing silence of the Engels 2 strategic bomber base was shattered by a thermal event that would make a blast furnace look like a campfire. Parked on the northern hardstand was Russia's pride and joy, a $270 million Tu-160M White Swan missile carrier delivered fresh from the factory just 3 weeks prior. It sat silent, its massive variable sweep wings creating a stark silhouette against the snow, completely unaware that its existence was about to be canceled. Nearby, a stockpile of 60 Kh-101 cruise missiles, the lifeblood of Russia's winter offensive, sat exposed on transport loaders waiting for the morning sortie that would never come. In the span of 90 seconds, a swarm of Ukrainian drones costing less than the catering budget for a Kremlin banquet was about to turn this strategic asset into the world's most expensive pile of scrap metal. The foundations for this disaster were laid hours earlier deep within the fog banks rolling off the Volga River. At 2 a.m., 6 miniature reconnaissance quadcopters were already inside the perimeter. These weren't your standard military surveillance platforms. These were small, silent, and terrifyingly intelligent, equipped with thermal cameras boasting a 640 by 512 resolution that turned the pitch-black night into a crisp, grayscale video game. They hovered at 260 feet, drifting like ghosts through the heavy river mist, a natural phenomenon that Ukraine had weaponized into a radar-cluttering cloak of invisibility. The target they were stalking was the Tu-160M, an aircraft that represents the pinnacle of Soviet-era engineering and modern Russian modernization efforts. This beast boasts a maximum speed of Mach 2.05, or roughly 1,380 miles per hour, powered by 4 massive NK-32-02 afterburning turbofan engines that generate 55,000 pounds of thrust each. It has a range of 7,640 miles without refueling and can carry a payload of 88,185 pounds of nuclear or conventional death. But right now it was just a sitting duck made of titanium and aluminum. The Russians had parked it in a semi-open revetment because the new reinforced hangars promised in 2024 were still just lines on a blueprint, likely due to corruption eating the concrete budget. Satellite confirmation from 3 days prior had locked in the coordinates, but it was the mini recon drones that provided the real-time visual confirmation needed for the strike. Using AI visual matching algorithms that didn't rely on GPS or laser designation, the drones compared the thermal signature of the parked bomber against a preloaded database of 3D models. They weren't looking for a generic plane, they were looking for the specific heat soak of the NK-32-02 engines, which retain warmth for hours after a test run. Once the AI confirmed the target, it didn't radio home. That would trigger Russia's electronic warfare sensors. Instead, it sent a burst transmission via a localized tight beam optical link to the waiting swarm. The main attack force consisted of 50 UJ-26 Bober Beaver drones, but these had been heavily modified for a one-way ticket to glory. Each Bober carried a 44-pound high-explosive anti-tank heat warhead designed to punch through armor, but equally effective at turning complex aerospace alloys into molten slag. With a range of 620 miles, these drones had launched from deep inside Ukraine, navigating via terrain-following radar that kept them below the treetops. But 50 drones against the Engels 2 air defense network should have been a suicide mission. Russia had ringed the base with its most advanced systems. The S-400 Triumph, capable of tracking targets 250 miles away, stood watch alongside the Panzer S-1, a point defense system designed specifically to eat drones for breakfast. However, Ukraine had brought a new trick to the party, one borrowed from the U.S. Air Force's playbook and adapted with a shoestring budget. 10 of the incoming UAVs weren't carrying explosives. They were decoys equipped with radar signature enhancers that made them look exactly like Storm Shadow cruise missiles on a radar screen. This tactic, based on the ADM-160MALD miniature air-launched decoy concept, was about to play a psychological game with the Russian radar operators. As the swarm approached the Volga, the decoy group suddenly popped up to 5,000 feet, screaming for attention and lighting up the Russian search radars like a Christmas tree. Inside the S-400 command vehicle, the screens were suddenly flooded with high-priority threats. The system's algorithms, trained to prioritize cruise missiles, took the bait hook, line, and sinker. The Russian commander saw 10 fast movers incoming at altitude and panicked, assuming a NATO-style missile barrage was underway. He ordered the battery to engage, and 4 massive 48 N6 missiles roared off the rails, trailing fire into the night sky to intercept targets that were essentially flying plywood boxes with radar reflectors. While the SE-400 was busy chasing ghosts in the stratosphere, the real killers were hugging the deck at 260 feet, using the riverbank to mask their approach from the low-altitude search radars. The Panzer Swan systems, which were supposed to be the last line of defense, were now the only thing standing between the Tu-160M and destruction. But the Panzer has a fatal flaw known as channel saturation. It can track a theoretical maximum of targets, but it can only effectively engage 4 at a time within a specific sector. The decoy group had forced the Panzer operators to look up shifting their radar focus to the high-altitude threat that the S-400s were already engaging. It created a phantom window, a gap in situational awareness that lasted maybe 45 seconds. But in modern warfare, 45 seconds is an eternity. By the time the Panzer operators realized the high threats were decoys, the suicide swarm was already emerging from the fog less than 2 miles out. The Panzer's acquisition radar finally picked up the low-flying mass, but the screen was a mess of clutter caused by the dense fog and the river's surface reflections. The system struggled to differentiate between the drones and the environmental noise. When it finally locked on, it was overwhelmed by the sheer number of targets. 50 hostile contacts appeared instantly at point-blank range. The Panzer's fire control computer essentially suffered a nervous breakdown trying to prioritize 50 imminent threats simultaneously. The operator frantically switched to the twin 30mm cannons, unleashing a wall of tungsten at 5,000 rounds per minute, desperate to create a flak screen. They managed to shred 18 of the incoming Bober drones, turning them into fireballs that skipped across the frozen runway. But 18 out of 50 is a failing grade when the remaining 32 are carrying high explosives. The swarm split into 2 distinct kill teams guided by the AI logic that had been updated by the recon drones just moments before. Kill Team Alpha, consisting of 10 drones, dove straight for the Tu-160M. They weren't aiming for the fuselage, they were targeting the engine intakes. The Tu-160's massive air intakes are the lungs of the aircraft, sucking in incredible amounts of air to feed the turbines. They are also a direct tunnel to the most expensive and delicate machinery on the plane. The lead drone slammed into the number 2 engine intake at 200 miles per hour. The heat warhead detonated instantly. The shaped charge jet, burning at thousands of degrees, punched through the intake cowling and traveled straight down the throat of the engine, impacting the compressor blades. Titanium is a wonder metal. It's light and strong. But when titanium catches fire, it burns with a ferocity that is nearly impossible to extinguish. The explosion shattered the turbine blades, sending shrapnel tearing through the engine casing and severing the fuel lines feeding the afterburner. Jet fuel sprayed onto the superheated wreckage, igniting instantly. But the real damage was the thermal shock to the airframe itself. The intense heat warped the central wing box, the structural spine of the aircraft that allows the wings to sweep back and forth. Once that titanium structure deforms, the aircraft is effectively totaled. You can't just hammer it back into shape. Meanwhile, Kill Team Bravo, the larger group of 22 drones, had a different target. The stockpile of KH-101 cruise missiles sitting on the loading carts 1,300 feet away. These missiles, each weighing 5,300 pounds and packed with their own warheads and fuel, were sitting ducks. The drones descended in a synchronized dive, their AI adjusting for the wind shift caused by the burning bomber nearby. 40 impacts were recorded in rapid succession. The first drone hit the center of the missile cluster, detonating its warhead against the thin skin of a KH-101 fuel tank. The resulting explosion triggered a sympathetic detonation. 1 missile cooked off, then another, then 3 more. The JP-10 jet fuel inside the cruise missiles ignited, creating a 5,200-degree Fahrenheit fireball that engulfed the entire loading area. The shock wave, estimated at 60 pounds per square inch, swept across the airfield, shattering windows in the control tower a mile away and knocking the defending Panzer crew unconscious inside their vehicle. Shrapnel from the exploding missiles turned the surrounding support vehicles into Swiss cheese. The chain reaction disabled or destroyed 60 cruise missiles in under 2 minutes. To put that in perspective, that is roughly 20% of the entire salvo Russia had been hoarding for their winter campaign against Ukraine's energy grid. Back at the Tu-160M, the fire had spread to the adjacent fuel trucks that had been preparing to top off the bomber. The White Swan, designed to deliver nuclear Armageddon, was now burning on its own tarmac, a victim of cheap plastic drones and smart software. The Russian airbase commanders were paralyzed. The confusion generated by the decoys meant that for the first crucial minutes they thought they were under a massive NATO air attack. By the time they realized it was a drone swarm, the damage was done. They scrambled two Su-35 fighters from a nearby base, but it was a gesture of futility. The Su-35s arrived 20 minutes late, circling helplessly over the burning wreckage, their pilots staring down at the humiliation of the strategic aviation forces. The strategic fallout was immediate and catastrophic. With Engels, too compromised, Russia was forced to evacuate its remaining Tu-160 fleet. 8 bombers were hurriedly scrambled in order to relocate to Alenia Air Base 2,000 miles away in the Arctic Circle. This wasn't just a change of address. Alenia lacks the specialized heavy maintenance infrastructure required to keep these hangar queens flying regularly. Operating from Alenia meant longer flight times to launch positions, increased airframe fatigue, and a logistical nightmare to transport the massive missiles through the snow. The attack effectively delayed Russia's winter strategic bombing campaign by at least 6 weeks, buying Ukraine invaluable time to repair its grid and receive more air defense systems. The Tu-160M costs roughly $270 million, not including the years of R&D and the irreplaceable nature of the airframe. The 60 Kh-101 missiles were worth approximately $13 million each. Total Russian losses for the night approached $1 billion. The cost of the Ukrainian operation may be $2 million, drones, decoys, and coffee included. The use of the decoy drones to mimic the Storm Shadow signature was the masterstroke. It exploited the rigid hierarchical training of Russian operators who are taught to prioritize high-value NATO threats. By forcing the S-400 to look up and engage phantom targets, Ukraine effectively stripped the base of its long-range eyes. And by overloading the Panzer with a saturation attack from the heavy clutter of the river fog, they neutralized the short-range defense. The Panzer's radar simply couldn't process the volume of data in the time required to aim the guns. It was a denial-of-service attack, but with high explosives. The damage to the Tu-160M's engines was critical. The NK-3202 engines are hand-built masterpieces that take months to manufacture. The thermal damage to the intake and the warping of the titanium wing box meant that this aircraft would likely never fly supersonic again if it flew at all. Repairing it would take at least 8 months and require it to be transported back to the factory in Kazan, a logistical impossibility given its current condition. Propaganda channels in Moscow went silent. There was no way to spin this. Satellite imagery taken the next morning showed the undeniable scorch marks and the foam-covered silhouette of the bomber. The invincible shield of the Russian aerospace forces had been pierced by a swarm of lawnmower engines with wings. This operation proved that in the age of drone warfare, no asset is safe no matter how far behind the front lines it sits. The concept of the safe harbor air base is dead. Distance is no longer a defense when your enemy can send a swarm of autonomous robots to knock on your front door. Russia will now be forced to pull more air defense assets from the front lines to protect these rear area bases, thinning the herd in the Donbass and opening gaps for Ukrainian tactical aviation. It's a classic dilemma: protect the strategic assets in the rear and lose the tactical battle at the front, or go all in on the front and watch your strategic fleet burn at home. Ukraine didn't need to steal the White Swan. They just needed to clip its wings, break its legs, and set its nest on fire. And as the smoke clears over the Volga, one thing is certain: the Russian commanders at Engels too are going to have a very, very bad performance review. This is what happens when a military stuck in the 20th century tries to fight a war against 21st century innovation. The Tu-160M was built to fight a nuclear war with America, but it died fighting a swarm of plastic robots in the fog. Bye for now.